are some of the best prospects that the Baltimore Ravens could select at pick number 14? We talk about that and more with a very special guest next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. And we're back. It is a Thursday edition episode, and we have a very special guest returning to the show in Cole Jackson. And Cole and I talk about a bunch of great things throughout the entirety of this show, but I am pulling a bit of a back to the future moment here as I'm actually talking to you in this intro after the recording because of technology. Yes, during like the very end of the first segment, my voice and my video do not sync up together. I don't know why. What I've learned doing this show is that sometimes technology is not your friend, and this is one of those cases. The good news is that Cole's audio and video are synced. They're completely fine, so I'm glad because that's really good. But for me, I wanted to just make everybody aware so that you're not kind of sitting there in the first segment if you're on video form and you're like getting there and all of a sudden you're thinking, why isn't the audio and the video synced up? I wanted to just prepare, so I apologize for that and any inconveniences. This has never happened for me before, so I wasn't just going to scrap the whole show because Cole put so many good points on here, but I do want to just make people aware that that is the case starting around the end of the first segment. The content is still fine. The audio is still fine. It's just my voice in the video is a little unsynced on my end only. So there's the Back to the Future moment. Technology happens sometimes. You just got to roll with it. And if you're here with me on video form today on YouTube, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. It does help out a ton. We put out daily Ravens content 5 days per week. So if you want daily Ravens content and updated look on the team and the happenings surrounding the team, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it. And everybody who's already subscribed as well, I appreciate you. Also in audio form, be sure to follow us there, turn notifications on, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. And thank you to all of the audio listeners as well. So without any further ado, let's dive in to the content with Cole Jackson. Making his return to the show after a little bit of a hiatus here, Mr. Cole Jackson himself. Cole, the draft is coming up less than 3 weeks away. The Ravens have made some big signings in free agency, and they're about to make some big flashes in the draft. How you doing today?
I'm doing good, buddy. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back. It has been a while. It's been a crazy offseason. A lot of content, a lot of draft watching. I'm at the point where I just wish the draft was 2 weeks sooner because I'm ready to kick this thing off. I don't know how much more I can do my evenings with college football, but it's been fun. There's a lot of good players in this draft. And so it's been a really fun scouting process. I've been enjoying it.
And it feels like there are a ton of just amazing prospects in this class, a very deep class in multiple positions, which benefits the Ravens in a really big way, considering some of the needs that they have. But I wanted to start off, Cole, talking about the offseason the Ravens have had in free agency so far and just the signings they've made. Obviously, the big fish being Marcus Williams, who they brought in on that 5-year, $70 million contract, bringing in a couple of smaller pieces as well. Morgan Moses on that 3-year, $15 million deal. Michael Pierce coming in. They've had a couple of sagas with Darius Smith and even Bobby Wagner, if you want to call them sagas, but they have tried to, I think, make aggressive moves and be aggressive, which is something that I think people wanted to see, myself included. So, Cole, what are your overall takeaways from the players they have signed, the players they've maybe missed down on, and what you maybe expect in the future here?
Yeah, I think if you kind of look at, the first day, everyone was kind of like, oh, what are the Ravens going to do? And then day 2, they came in, and I don't think anyone saw Marcus Williams coming. And it was just one of those deals where, pivotal landmark move in terms of the money spent. They got aggressive with the cap construction, with a bit of a backloaded deal on a 5-year contract, with the first 2 years being low cap hits. So I think people that wanted the aggressiveness in the contract construction got that. It was out of position of need. People say safety is a little bit devalued. I highly disagree with that. I think when you watch him on tape, you see a guy that can really put your corners in a position to succeed. He races the back end of the defense. Clear communicator. I think he'll really help out with some of those breaks in coverage that the Ravens had last year. So just a really good, solid player at a position in need. The Ravens have been kind of filled with box safeties, and they really needed that true center fielder, and they went out and got a top 3 guy at the free safety position. So number one, I think that was huge. Morgan Moses is the definition of reliability. He's he just doesn't miss games. He's always ready to play, plays through injuries if he is banged up. So I think that was a good move in the sense that it just got us someone that, if he needs to start 17 games, he's going to be able to. And so it really addressed that right tackle spot. The question was, do you go get a Morgan Moses or do you look for more of a swing tackle and like an Abraham Lucas who ended up re-signing with the Commanders? And, I kind of see pros and cons to both because you do want to ensure for, a Ronnie Stanley setback or, Ronnie Stanley not being able to play because that's what got the Ravens into trouble last year. So they took the route of let's lock down right tackle. It's going to be one of those situations where if Morgan Moses starts day one, your right side of your offensive line is fine. You got Kevin Zeitler, got Morgan Moses, you're sitting pretty. Good, steady veteran presence. He's going to be one of those guys. He's going to give up pressures here and there. He's going to give up a couple sacks this season. That's just the kind of player he was, but he's super consistent. He's one of those guys where he's always going to give up 2 pressures, but he's never going to give up more than 4. So as an offensive coordinator, you can live with that. That's going to give Lamar a lot of trust in his offensive line on that right side with a good protector in Morgan Moses and Kevin Zeitler performing as I believe he came out 4th this year for offensive guard pass blocking. So I feel really good about what they did there on that right side. And the question is just going to be, they're going to have to draft, and we'll probably get into it later, but they're going to have to draft a guy with left tackle ability to ensure the Ronnie Stanley contract piece. And then obviously the slam dunk, kind of the, strike 3 call it would have been Zadarius Smith. It made a lot of sense. Position of need. Even with a couple of good edge rushers and Bowser and Owe, Zadarius Smith was a guy that could slide inside and do some dirty work at the 3 tech on obvious passing downs and really kind of get back to unleashing 4 pass rushers, which I think is something Mike McDonald could have really used. So just an unfortunate situation. Once you kind of heard a little bit more about the backstory where, they made an offer and they said, let's take this offer. And then they came back and made another counter offer and the Ravens accepted that one. And then he still backs out. It's like, it's hard to place a ton of blame on the Ravens for that one. They accepted his second, counter. So if he went to social media that night after Chandler Jones and Von Miller got their bags and said, we made a mistake. That's his right to do so, but I can kind of understand why the Ravens kind of closed the door on that. That's the definition of bad faith negotiating. So unfortunate, would have been a real cap on a great offseason in terms of getting 3 key pillars of this team. But Michael Pierce was a good signing. Going back and watching him on his Minnesota tape, they used him a ton as a 2-eye and obviously at the nose tackle spot. I think he's going to be able to provide a little bit of a pass rush. He's going to probably come off the field in 3rd down situations. Most nose tackles do, but when he's on 1st, 2nd down, he's going to eat running lanes. He's going to get pocket push when it is a pass. Just a good, steady nose tackle, more athletic than Brandon Williams. I think he's an upgrade there. So like that, I like bringing back Josh Bynes. Biggest concern, what I expected them to fill in some sort of way before the draft, and we're running out of days now, as I thought they'd bring in a vet corner. I thought, even at Chris Westry, even though he's not technically a veteran, he's still a younger player. Even seeing how much Tavon Young got, I thought, just a little bit of insurance to get a body. But it's interesting. Right now on their roster, they have Humphrey, Peters, you got Stevens in Washington who can do some slot and maybe a little bit of outside. But then your 3rd outside cornerback is Kayvon Seymour. And so it's like, what's their plan? What are they going to do there? Corner remains a huge issue. So that's kind of my big concern after the free agent roundup.
Yeah, there's a lot to take away from it. And I agree, Cole. It seems like now, whether it is before the draft signing a guy, after the draft signing a guy, it feels like their plan should be something along the lines of draft 2, sign 1, sign 2, draft 1. They need depth. They don't have a lot, as you talked about. And also one of the interesting parts of this offseason, Cole, was the Ravens in the center position. And I know that you kind of became the leader of the J.C. Treader to Baltimore train. And look, I was right there with you. I was talking about it here on this show where I thought that his addition would have been phenomenal. And in the market with him, there hasn't really been a ton of rumblings with J.C. Treader. It seems like recently it's kind of been pretty quiet on the front there. The Ravens haven't invested historically in the center position. They haven't put big money into that. So John Harbaugh's comments about, hey, we feel confident in the guys we have on our roster, probably not bringing in a free agent center. Do you agree with that? Or do you feel like Treader would really be this upgrade that would sincerely push this offensive line to maybe a new height?
I think the benefit of a J.C. Treader, like J.C. Treader is a great player. So, I mean, that's a benefit in and of itself. But the additional benefit, secondary benefit, whatever you want to call it, is it moves Patrick McCurry to kind of that insurance at left tackle. Now, I'm sure they'd still draft a guy, but it would, like, people don't like Patrick McCurry at tackle. And I just can't quite figure it out. I mean, pretty much anywhere he's aligned on the offensive line, whether it was at guard, center, tackle, center outside the snap issues that he had in one game, he just hasn't been a liability in pass protection. He's not the best run blocker. He's not overly physical. He's more of a zone blocker. He's playing in a gap scheme, so that's not the best. But in terms of him going to left tackle, everyone said he couldn't play right tackle, and he did it. And so everyone said he couldn't play center, and he did it. And it's just like, there's no person I'm gonna bet my money on to go out there and get the job done than Patrick McCurry. It's just what he's done through his career in Baltimore. So in terms of if Ronnie Stanley can't get back and he's your day one left tackle, you can find worse left tackles around the league. Looking at you, Alejandro Villanueva. That would he was an upgrade over him. He was the most steady tackle on this team last year. He never allowed more than 4 pressures in a game. Like he just didn't have these bad games that people keep talking about. So I think, in terms of him playing center, J.C. Treader would be a slam dunk. It's been a little weird. There's no buzz around him with any teams. There's no connections, no reported meetings. It's just been really weird. That's not just a Ravens thing. That's just this guy's a stud center. There's still a couple teams looking for centers. So why aren't more teams looking at J.C. Treader? I can't quite figure it out. But I do think he'd be a great fit. He played beside Kevin Zeitler back in 2017, 2016 with the Browns. Again, kind of lining up that idea of a veteran presence. You have Treader, Zeitler, and Moses as your center to right side. You feel pretty good in pass protection. You got to kind of sort out your left guard situation. You have 2 pretty good candidates to do so. And then obviously you're hoping Ronnie Stanley gets healthy. So I think that would have put them in a position to have a lot of success. I still would love to see J.C. Treader end up here. But if you've seen my revised Bring Me J.C. Treader meme, it's scratched out for Cole Strange because that's oddly enough, Cole Strange's player comparison in the NFL. So I think this center, there's a few centers in this draft class that I think the Ravens can bring in to compete with McCary. McCary's probably going to start day one for you unless they invest abnormally high. And I say that because the last time the Ravens spent, and this isn't even high, I think the highest they've drafted in the last 20 years at center was Jason Brown in 2005 in the 4th round. They just don't do it. They never have. That's why the Tyler Linderbaum 14 stuff is ludicrous to me. It doesn't fit. He doesn't fit their scheme. It doesn't fit their MO at center. And it sounds like such a Ravens move to move a UDFA offensive tackle to center, and you're probably going to get above average play out of them.
Yeah, I mean, over the course of even you can talk about recent examples like Ryan Jensen or signing Jeremy Zutah to a small contract, or obviously Matt Skura, the undrafted guy, McCary, the undrafted guy. It's just a position they haven't really invested in. So Treader would be great, but it's not that I don't have confidence in McCary. For me, it just feels like the super 6th offensive line role for him would be the best fit. But if he's your best player at center, I mean, you're going to start him at center. That's what you should do. So still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. Cole talked about Cole Strange, but we'll talk about some of those mid-round prospects in the 3rd segment. Coming up in the 2nd segment, we'll dive into pick number 14, some of the best options for the Ravens there. So be sure to stay tuned. But first, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. And so March Madness is over. We can stop talking about my Gonzaga and Illinois picks in the finals because that did not go well for me, but we can move on to the NBA playoffs where the Denver Nuggets will be facing off against the Golden State Warriors in round 1. And if you want to bet on that game or any other game throughout the NBA playoffs, be sure to do it with BetOnline. And BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So be sure to head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Cole Jackson. And Cole, the draft is exciting, and especially this year. I mean, the Ravens have 10 picks, 9 of them coming in the first 4 rounds. They have 5 in the 4th round. We'll talk about that in the final segment. But Cole, number 14 is a pick that the Ravens don't usually have. We usually see them picking in the early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s. 14 gives them, I think, a lot of room for doing what they want with that selection, whether it is trading up into the top 10. You could trade back for multiple assets. But at 14, it feels like, unless the board falls horribly wrong, they're going to have maybe 1 to 3 options from their top 10 on the board at 14. And I wanted to start by asking you about who are some of your top guys who are more of the realistic options to fall to 14, who you would just be ecstatic if the Ravens could get them there.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It's been hard to kind of get a read on who could fall. I mean, you kind of see some situations where Jermaine Johnson falls, and I think he's a fantastic option, fits the defense, would really, fit well opposite Owe as a base D end. I think Mike McDonald would know how to use him really well. But then it's like sometimes you can go 6 overall, and it's like, okay, he's completely unrealistic. And say the same about Charles Cross. Again, we talked about ensuring that left tackle spot. Charles Cross can also play a little bit of right tackle if you needed him to. One of those situations where if Stanley was healthy, he'll just find a way to get your 5 best offensive linemen on the O-line. So, obviously there's a guy like Derek Stingley, could he fall because of the injury history? He's definitely too talented to be falling. I think he answered a lot of those injury concerns with his pro day, with the athletic testing. It's hard to kind of envision that. Same with Sauce Gardner, similar to how Horn and Certain flew off 9-10 last year, I think it was. And I don't know if people remember, but the Cowboys were sitting there at 11 or 12, and they were all their fans were, one of these two is going to fall. Whoever falls, we'll just take them. And then both went rapid succession to the Panthers and Broncos right in front of them. So it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic play out, because you could end up with your nightmare board. And basically your nightmare board is you don't have Jermaine Johnson, Thibodeau's gone, Cross is gone, Gardner's gone, Stingley's gone, and you're kind of sitting there with a board where you have like Drake London, Jordan Davis, Trevor Penning, Zion Johnson, Jamison Williams, Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, Devontae Wyatt. So it's like, what do we do? And the conversation is none of these guys are worth 14. And so this is where I kind of always struggle, because I remember back when the Ravens picked 6 overall, the conversation was the Ravens need to trade back because none of those guys are going to be worth 6 unless one of the top 5 falls. And I feel like as fans, we never feel like the guys expected to be at our pick are worth that pick itself. So it's kind of tough, because obviously trading back, picking up picks is very helpful, and it gives you ammo for a later trade back. I see that a lot out there. Trade back in round 1 and then trade up in round 2 and kind of get back up into the the mid to early 30s, which I think is a great situation. But I guess the only thing I would say is you need 2 to tango, and if you don't like anyone on your board in the nightmare scenario, are other teams going to like? And there are situations, because people could say, maybe a team trades up for, the top wide receiver. I just said, you could be sitting there with Jameson Williams and Drake London, and the Ravens may not invest in a wide receiver in the first round again, but another team might love to, and they want to jump, the Saints and the Eagles who are looking for. So I think that situation makes sense. So I think if you're justifying it that way, it makes perfect sense that the Ravens could trade back. But in terms of guys that I'd be interested in, I think Jordan Davis checks a lot of boxes for me. I've said this on the timeline on Twitter a number of times. I don't think he's just a nose tackle. I don't see that in his game. Our friend Spencer Schultz put it out yesterday. He actually played more snaps at the 3 tech than at the 1 tech last year, which is kind of funny because he's called only 1 tech. I don't think the film supports that. You see him at the 3 tech all the time. He has the athletic profile that projects well there. He's still a pretty raw prospect. I did a film. He was actually my first film room over on Two Guys Watching Football that I did. And I did him with my buddy Michael Crawford at Abukari on Twitter. And he's still developing. He's got some he's got some things. He gets a little out of control at the point of attack, but in terms of athletic gifts, this is a 340-pound man that moves like he's 300 pounds. Like it's just that freakish of athleticism. So I think Jordan Davis would make a lot of sense. The Ravens in 2019 had a heavier interior defensive line when they had Michael Pierce at the one tech before he went to the the Vikings. And they had Brandon Williams at the three tech and a lot of their defensive alignment. So, maybe they go back to that and Pierce is your one tech and you have a lot of three tech snaps with Jordan Davis there. That gives you some heavy run stuffers. It would make a guy like Patrick Queen's life a lot easier because, he's going to have a lot of free shots. So I think Jordan Davis makes sense. Another guy that I don't think gets enough buzz is Andrew Booth out of Clemson, cornerback. I think he would fit really well. I don't know if people caught it in The Athletic. Jeff Zrebiak wrote this, I think it was this morning or yesterday, that a lot of people in the castle view Marlon Humphrey's best spot as in the slot. And that doesn't mean that he's just a slot corner. We know he can play anywhere. But with him having that flexibility, you could go outside corner, which is kind of what Andrew Booth projects as. Very willing, aggressive tackler, really good in press, has a little bit of struggles with his long speed, but I think a guy that would really fit I've said it a number of times, he just looks like a Ravens cornerback. So if you ended up with your three corners being Booth, Humphrey, and Peters, corners never a strength. You still got Brandon Stevens that can come in and do some work in your nickel and dime. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Would be really high on Andrew Booth. And I'd say the same about Trent McDuffie. I would be okay with McDuffie at 14. Again, a guy that I've seen, if we trade back, we could take him, but I think he'd be just fine at pick 14. He's a bit of a tougher evaluation, played a lot of cover three off ball at Washington, but has all the traits to project as even his ability to play press. So I think he's an every down corner. I think what he brings you, and same with his partner, Kyler Gordon, he's more of a second round pick to me. But both of them can kind of play inside outside. That allows you to be a little bit more matchup oriented because Marlon Humphrey also has that ability. It's only really Peters that's kind of relegated to just an outside corner. So I think that's a huge benefit. So those are kind of guys that I see there. If you're looking at the offensive line situation, Zion Johnson's a hard sell to me unless they really see him as a center, and he did take some of those snaps at the Senior Bowl, but they don't need another guard, so that wouldn't make sense to me. And then obviously the polarizing guy is Trevor Penning, and if they go with Trevor Penning, I'll see the vision because it's like if they need a left tackle, they took the top guy on the board, assuming Charles Cross is gone, and they made the commitment that we're going to make sure that we're prepared for Ronnie Stanley's insurance, and getting the top ranked left tackle in a lot of people's minds makes sense in that regard. And if Ronnie Stanley's healthy, he does have a skill set to move inside. I know a lot of people are lower on him. Is he worth the 14th overall pick? I'd probably say no. I think he's a first rounder. I think he's better suited in the mid to late, we'll say 20s, maybe the early 20s in the right situation. But I think if they're worried about trading back and seeing him go to a team like, I don't know, the Chargers that needs a little bit of offensive line help, they may play him opposite Rashawn Slater. They might be concerned about him going off the board, but he's just one of those guys where I do kind of get the conversation that they should trade back and take him. But in terms of guys I'd stick and pick, based on who could fall there guys, someone's going to fall, I feel like. So they're going to get a shot at someone good. But in terms of the nightmare scenario, I think Jordan Davis, Trent McDuffie, and Andrew Booth all kind of fit the bill for me.
Yeah, and part of how this board could fall in a good way depends, I think, on how many quarterbacks go in the top 13. And we've seen some rumblings about, obviously, Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral getting some recent rumblings. And if you can get one of those guys, or two, or even three in the top 13, that pushes these other guys down the board. You throw in a wide receiver in that conversation, let's say like a Garrett Wilson or Drake London, whoever would go, then all of a sudden you could have like a board of Jermaine Johnson, Jordan Davis, Andrew Booth, etc. And then if you're the Ravens, you're probably feeling pretty good about that. And you're saying, all right, yeah, we can pick from one of these guys. But Cole, speaking of wide receiver, is that a position you would invest the first round pick in at 14? Is that a Chris Olave to you? Is it a London? Is it a Garrett Wilson? Are you taking a wide receiver at 14 if that's one of the best options left for you? Or is that more a position you would invest in the second or mid rounds?
Let's be clear. I didn't think they'd take Rashad Bateman last year. I really didn't think they'd do it, and they told me to shut up, and then they took him. Is it the biggest need on the team? No, probably not. But if it's a situation where they're one of these guys is that high on their board, which it very well could be. They could assess Drake London as like a top 10 player. They could assess. I don't think Olave is a good fit here because I really think they need a guy that can, play well in space, get downfield. I think Olave is a little bit of a shorter area receiver. I think Drake London would be the guy that would make sense because he's got a complementary skill set to Hollywood and Bateman. And I will say this because I've said this a number of times and I do believe it. I don't think you don't invest in a high level wide receiver because of guys like Duvernay and Prochet. And that's not disrespect to them. They have a role. They'll have a role to play. If you have the opportunity to get an X receiver, that kind of mold, and it's not just an X receiver because that could mean different things in different offenses. It's more just that traditional, bigger body, more physical, outside receiver. That would kind of be like a Drake London. So if they have him as a top 10 player, it'll make sense because they're going to stick to their BPA model. And it is offensive weapons for Lamar. They have gone wide receiver heavy in the draft versus investing in free agency. So it'll surprise me to see it in the first, but in the second, I've been on the George Pickens 45 train, choo, chugging along on that train. So I love that pick. So I'd be a little surprised. I think there'll be better players available that meet bigger immediate needs. Like I said, they've shocked me before, so it's not to say they won't do it again.
Right. In this draft, it is a deep wide receiver class. So they don't have to necessarily invest in a wide receiver at 14 to get a solid prospect for them. One of the mid-round receivers who his range is kind of undetermined right now, but Justin Ross, another guy who I personally like a lot. I was in love with Des Fitzpatrick last draft, and the Ravens didn't get him, and I was like, no, Lamar Jackson's target. But I feel like a player like that or someone else of that nature could be a good fit for the Ravens, but again, it wouldn't shock me if the Ravens invested in a wide receiver at 14, just continuing that trend because of, even just the wide receiver market that has been booming recently. You get a young, solid player on a at least 4-year deal, depending on the 5th-year option that comes. And I think that could be a solid investment. But at the same time, I'm with you on George Pickens, Cole. I'm with you on the Pickens train. You can conduct it. I'll just be along for the ride. But I feel like that would be a very solid pick there for sure. But we're still not done here on Locked On Ravens. We'll talk about some mid-round prospects next with Cole. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, let me tell you a bit about Shady Rays and sunglasses. To me, they are very important. And for me, Shady Rays, they do a lot for me personally. Shady Rays, it's an independent sunglass company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for just a fraction of the price. So that means you get polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. And also, something you won't find anywhere else, Shady Rays has an insane protection program. So that includes lost and broken protection on every pair. So they'll send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happens. So whether your car runs over them or you leave them at the beach or whatnot, Shady Rays will give you a brand new pair. Has that happened to you before? I'll let you figure that out for yourself. But Shady Rays also, they give 10 meals to fight hunger in America whenever you shop with them. And exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com. Use code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. And next, let me tell you a bit about Rock Auto. And sometimes when you head into a shop, there can be very intimidating questioning when you are asked about car parts, but you have Rock Auto to help you out. And plus, you have the computers with access to rockauto.com, both at home and in your pocket. And you can save a lot of time and money when using Rock Auto. And plus, they're a family business, so they've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices, they're reliably low for every customer. And they have everything you need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet as well. They've helped me out a ton. So be sure to go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On. There, how'd you hear about us box? So know we sent you amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with Cole Jackson. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Go check out NFL Draft here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast with Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker. They bring the NFL Draft to life every single weekday. But Cole, the mid-rounds have been something that the Ravens value a ton with the comp picks and a ton just with trading back, getting those assets, and they have hit on a lot of them over the course of their franchise history. And I don't think that's going to change, especially with them having 5 fourth-rounders, at least preliminarily this year, because we could see trade backs, we could see trade ups. We don't really know who's going to be picked where, what picks the Ravens will have. But who are some of your guys in this draft? Some guys that you have just fallen in love with, where you could see them as a mid-round selection for the Ravens that could be severely undervaluing them and the Ravens get a steal?
Starting off with offensive tackles, because I think this is a weird draft class in the sense that there's actually some projectable left tackles in the mid rounds, which is kind of rare. Usually there's a couple, but I think there's actually a handful, which is good news for the Ravens because they are going to want to get a developmental tackle. So guys that stand out, Max Mitchell at Louisiana Lafayette, a little bit undersized, but really like his battle. Matt Waletzko out of North Dakota. He was at the Senior Bowl. Love his size. He's got all the measurables you want to see. He needs a good year in an NFL weight room. He has a really weak anchor. I think that showed on tape and at the Senior Bowl as well. So I think that's something I'd want to see Waletzko develop. But all the measurables you could want in a guy, really good foot speed, showed a good varying set between his 45 and vertical set. So I think he makes sense. Kellen Disha to Arizona State's another guy that really pops to me. Zach Tom at Wake Forest is a really interesting guy because he actually shut down, in my opinion, Jermaine Johnson when Wake Forest played Florida State. And he actually reminds me a ton of Patrick McCurry. He's undersized. He's got short arms. He doesn't give a crap about his arm length. He goes out there and battles every rep and just finds ways to win. And did it against some of the top competition, including Jermaine Johnson. So that's actually a game I frequently see when people are looking at the concerns that do exist with Jermaine Johnson. They always bring up his battle against Zach Tom, so that really speaks to him. He's also got a skill set that I think projects well to center, so he could give them a center option as well. So he's in that conversation. And then the last tackle I look at is Obinna Easy out of TCU. Again, all the measurables you could want in the world. Heck of an athlete. I think he was probably one of the top 10 testers at the combine. But raw football game, but something that could really come along. Look to get better throughout the year. I watched his 3rd game and his 9th game this year, and maybe it was last year. I can't remember if it was 2020 or 2021, but showed really refined technique between those 2 periods, which I always find interesting just to see how a guy can progress through just one season. So it speaks really well to him getting better as a player. When you look at kind of cornerbacks, a guy that I don't think gets enough buzz is Kobe Bryant out of Cincinnati. He actually popped in me, not because of his name, RIP 24, but he actually popped in me because I went to watch Sauce Gardner, and Sauce Gardner barely gets targeted because all the targets are going to Kobe Bryant, which isn't necessarily that. Like, people might be like, well, they're picking on him. Well, no, they're just not throwing it at Sauce because he's a top 5 player in this draft, top 10 player in this draft. So it gave you a lot of looks at Kobe Bryant's skill set, and he held up really well, especially in some bigger games. So he's a guy that really intrigues me. Love his outside skill set. I think he could really benefit kind of the way when Anthony Averett ended up here. Didn't have to play right away. He got to kind of season and develop, which is what you want your mid-round picks. You don't want to have to start a mid-round pick week 1. So I think he's got a lot of skills that the Ravens will covet. Josh Jobe out of Alabama is another guy that I think the Ravens will covet. They seem to like Bama corners, and it does make sense. They play a lot of single high there, which stresses your outside corners. And Jobe, a lot like Anthony Averett out of Alabama, was put in those situations. I think they'll see that on tape and really see how he could fit in their system. Zion McCollum out of Sam Houston State's getting all the buzz, and for all the right reasons. I mean, it's hard to find Sam Houston State tape out there, but from what I did see, really solid guy, obviously great measurables, insane size, at 6'4", pretty fluid for being that size. So a guy that I'm pretty high on. And then when you look at some of the other positions like linebacker, Jojo Doman out of Nebraska makes a ton of sense as a Raven. He's a converted safety that could kind of come in and be a coverage specialist and kind of play a little bit in the nickel, a little bit in the dime. He's not going to be, a stout downhill run defender, but they kind of have that with Queen and Bynes and Harrison. So, if they really want to focus on replacing Chris Board as kind of a core special teamer who could be a pass coverage specialist, I think Dolman would make sense. I think Terrell Bernard out of Baylor makes sense in that regard too. DeMarco Jackson out of Appalachian State. And then some of the later guys, a guy that just screams Raven, won't surprise me if he ends up here, whether it's with like a 6th-round pick or a UDFA, is Josh Ross out of Michigan. He's just, people won't love hearing this, but he's just your through and through core special teamer. And I can see the Ravens, and he goes, from Michigan. So there's the Harbaugh connection. There might be a way he ends up a Raven. When you look at some of the edge rushers, Alex Wright out of UAB, is a guy I love. Jeffrey Gunter out of Coastal Carolina. Dominique Robinson out of Miami, Ohio. Amari Barno out of Virginia Tech. This is a deep edge class. And there's a lot of interesting guys. So those are 4 that really pop to me. Alex Wright really reminds me of that kind of inside-outside skill set. I know a lot of Ravens fans are high on Josh Pascal as a 2nd or 3rd round pick, and I am too. If they can't get him there, I'd love to get Alex Wright kind of with 4th round pick, because I think he's got a similar skill set. Dominique Robinson is a converted wide receiver, super athletic, still learning to play the position, tested really well. Did some good work at the Senior Bowl. I think he could really come along with some coaching. Jeffrey Gunter was on Bruce Feldman's freaks list. He's just an absolute stud of an athlete, and I think could really develop, especially as a linebacker in the Ravens scheme. And he won't be asked to kind of play right away, so I think he'd be in a position to succeed here. And then Amari Barno is another guy that screams Raven. Ran a 4.3. Was 4.3 or 4.4 at the combine. Absolute freak of an athlete. Not a refined pass rusher. Kind of like your sort of a poor man's Tyus Bowser coming out of Houston a few years ago. So I think he makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there are a lot of mid-round options for this team, and especially when you look at all the needs that the Ravens do have, they could certainly double down on a couple of positions. And Cole, that's where I want to go with you here, and just what positions you would not be shocked whatsoever if this team took 2, maybe even 3 of. So obviously some of the bigger needs, edge, corner, etc. Where do you see the Ravens potentially doubling down in this draft?
I think you nailed it. Corner, because I think it's an essential need. Like I said earlier, they only have 4 guys on the roster right now. We're 1 injury away from having Kevin Oestreicher in there as a slot corner and Cole Jackson as a dime backer. It's going to get scary like it did last season. And then edge is just too deep to not do it. Like I said, there's a couple of those inside-outside skill sets where I think they could duplicate what they were hoping to do with Zadarius Smith, Josh Pascal, Alex Wright, D'Angelo Malone, those guys that can kind of slide inside as a little bit of a 3-tech, but also play some rush, and then double dipping with more of a speed rusher. So kind of power rusher, speed rusher, classic combination makes a ton of sense. Again, a position that on paper right now isn't all that full. I think they have 4 or 5 guys if you count Jalen Ferguson, who I think we all agree could get upgraded. It wouldn't be abnormal for them to carry 6 defensive linemen and 6 outside linebackers and 5 defensive linemen, especially if one of them has special teams upside, which some of these speed rushers do that I kind of mentioned earlier. So I think edge and corner makes too much sense not to.
Yeah, and also I can see them obviously offensive lines, it encompasses everything. So obviously tackle, center, guard, everything. But I feel like the sweet spot for me there is like 1 to 3 guys. I think one's kind of on the low end where I feel like they could probably get that tackle option we were talking about earlier, then also that maybe mid to late round center. I don't think they need to draft a guard. I think they're pretty set there. They don't have like maybe a center with guard versatility or tackle with guard versatility, but not necessarily a pure guard that can't do anything else. I think that's another position, the offensive line, where they could certainly double dip for sure. But Cole, that's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for hopping on here, and tell everybody where they can find your work and what you're working on as this draft. I mean, seriously, it's coming up fast.
Absolutely. Over 2 guys watching football on YouTube. Be sure to go check it out. Tons of film rooms on there now. I think I got about 15 up. I got some work dropping on redstarbaltimore.com with James Ogden. I think it's going to go out in the next couple of days. Basically a big Ravens specific draft guide, tons of profiles. James wrote about 100. I wrote 10, so I shouldn't act like this is my project. It's James's. But I was honored to have the chance to kind of throw some in there, which is going to be really good, really helpful for Ravens fans to kind of see, these write-ups on players, but with some of the specific Ravens nuance. So be sure to check that out. And then over on Twitter, where I'm kind of getting on the timeline every day at Cole Jackson FB.
Yeah, for sure. And be sure to check out Cole's work. The link to his Twitter, the Two Guys Watching Football YouTube, it will be in the description below. So obviously Cole displayed and flexed his football knowledge here today. He flexes it a lot more over on the Twitter timeline and the Two Guys Watching Football YouTube page. But Cole, thanks so much. I really appreciate you coming on here. It's always great talking football with you. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll round out the week with more Ravens talk. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.